Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Deep Roots episode, exploring the headwaters of the Blue River Valley with Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. We have a great show for you today, but before we begin, I just have a few announcements to make. Right out the gate, I want to make a quick corrections corner for this episode. In the Zoom description and at the beginning of this episode, you'll hear me say 2/3 of the water that goes into the Blue River Valley is our drinking water in the Kansas City area. What I meant to say is that 2/3 of the rain that falls in southern Kansas City metropolitan area drains into the Blue River. That's not to discredit the value that the Blue River Watershed has on our health as a community, but just wanted to make that correction right out the gate for you all. And welcome. Today's episode is sponsored by Johnson County Park and Recreation District and donors like you. If you enjoyed today's program, please consider visiting us online after today's episode and make a donation. Each first Friday at 1 p.m., I host a native landscape chat with the landscape stewards of the Anita B. Gorman Conservation Discovery Center. I want to let you all know that tomorrow's session on the 4th of July will be canceled. We will resume August 1st Friday at 1 p.m. Feel free to join us then with your gardening questions or simply to take a leisurely stroll around the grounds of the Discovery Center to see what's blooming and learn maintenance tips for your native garden. Speaking of what's blooming, if you enjoy learning monthly gardening tips and naturalist notes, consider subscribing to our monthly newsletter, The Pollinator. This month we have some awesome things blooming that we've highlighted, including purple coneflower, gray-headed coneflower, and butterfly milkweed. If you want to get your hands dirty and learn cues for care for your native garden, join me 3 times a month at the Anita B. Gorman Conservation Discovery Center for our Discover Native Gardening sessions, where you can learn skills, be empowered, and help us grow community. You can register online for this and any of our other programs by visiting us online at deeproots.org. Our next session is going to be next Tuesday, July 8th from 5 to 7 p.m. We'll be working in the Deep Roots demonstration garden, identifying annual warm season weeds, right? Both those that are undesirable and those that we love, and how to manage them with care. Additionally, we have a few greenhouse sessions coming up at the Discovery Center as well. These 3 dates, July 15th, July 18th, and the 24th of July, will help aid the Missouri Department of Conservation's efforts for monarch mania. This event happens later in September, where all the plants we've grown in the greenhouse then are given away to the community to help support not only monarchs, but great biodiversity efforts across our region. This is a free workshop where you can learn how to grow native plants yourself and enjoy camaraderie with a bunch of native plant nerds like me. So be sure to sign up online as well. And folks, I have to tell you, I just got back in town from a visit in the Ozarks. I spent a week out there filming several episodes for future Deep Roots webinars. So I hope you'll consider joining me for our next episode on July 17th, where I discuss Ozark natural communities like glades, woodlands, riparian areas, even some really cool natural features like Prairie Hollow Gorge and Alley Springs. Hope you'll tune in at 12 p.m. Central Standard on July 17th. As always, this webinar will be recorded and all the resources will be available online following today's presentation. After today's episode, I'll email you directly links with resources covered in today's episode, as well as a recording to today's show. Don't forget, put your comments in the chat. I love to hear where you're all tuning in from and what's blooming in your garden currently. And if you have questions for our guest expert, be sure to put them in the Q&A. The second half of today's session will include an AMA, Ask Me Anything, with our guest expert, Matt Garrett, Natural Resource Manager of Johnson County Parks. Be sure to put those questions in the Q&A for Matt and myself. Following today's show, I hope you'll visit us online at deeproots.org for more information on upcoming events, webinars, and native gardening resources. While you're there, consider making a donation for programs like this to be possible. All right, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Matt Garrett to the virtual stage. Matt is the Natural Resource Manager for the Gold Medal award-winning Johnson County Park and Recreation District. He's dedicated his entire career to environmental education and natural resource management in the Kansas City region. Matt's a regional conservation leader focused on large-scale prairie restoration, invasive plant removal, and conservation planning. In his spare time, he mountain bikes, spins records, and throws frisbees to his blue heeler, Anna. Welcome, Matt. How are you doing today?
Good. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us again. So, Matt, we're in the dog days of summer, but nature still awaits us. What are some things that you like to do outdoors, recreationally, during the summertime?
Yeah, so I like to mountain bike and trail run, but it's super dangerous because the entire time I'm doing it, I'm looking at work projects. And so I live next to Shawnee Mission Park, and the whole time I'm running or I'm biking, I'm thinking of everything that needs to be done on all 1,700 acres of the park. So it's hard to sometimes turn my brain off and enjoy my recreational activities.
It can be tough. Sometimes you have to quite literally leave the state in order to
Yes.
enjoy and
I
appreciate.
enjoy visiting other people's parks, but I'm still looking at nature.
I get that. I get that completely. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Matt. And folks, again, today we'll be discussing the headwaters of the Blue River, including the Blue River Watershed as a whole. So if you have questions about that or anything pertaining to native landscapes or restoration work, be sure to put your questions in the Q&A section, but give us your feedback and little little bits of commentary in the chat at your leisure. Let's go ahead and get started for today's Deep Roots episode, exploring the Blue River Valley with Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. You've likely heard of the mighty Mo, but are you familiar with the life force of the greater Kansas City area known as the Blue River? 2/3 of all drinking water in the metropolitan area comes from this watershed. Beginning in the pastoral fields of Johnson County, Kansas, it flows up through Kansas City, Missouri, spanning 41 miles to join the Missouri River. People, plants, and wildlife depend on clean water to survive. Join us as we explore the landscapes near the headwaters of the Blue River, meet organizations and wildlife that advocate for its health, and discuss ways you can enjoy recreational activities in the Blue River Valley. Enjoy today's Deep Roots Native Plant webinar on the headwaters of the Blue River Valley with Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. Okay, let's get started.
We're in southern Johnson County today at the headwaters of the Blue River. It's a special place that few see in southern Johnson County. Johnson County Park and Recreation District is piecing together numerous properties along Coffee Creek, Camp Ranch, and along Mission Road, all over the upper Blue River watershed. And today we're at the intersection of Coffee and Wolf that form the Blue River, which flows all the way through Kansas City to the Missouri. Around 800,000 people live in the watershed of the Blue River, and 1/3 of the rain that falls in Kansas City is in the Blue River watershed. But that all starts here in this peaceful valley in southern Johnson County. So there's some community partners on the Missouri side that kind of do a Blue River scorecard, and the Blue River, I think, it's gotten as low as a 40%, and I believe it's gotten 46%, and its health has improved. But there's a lot of urban development and housing developments. You can see the banks here are not accessible, that we have a lot of flashy water that comes through here, and the Blue River gets very high very quickly. And so there's a lot of erosion. We've done some work recently at Heritage Park, and we created a lot more capacity in Heritage Park Lake, which flows into Coffee Creek, and we're trying to grab as much silt and stormwater as we can on JCPRD parkland so it doesn't impact the Blue. And so we've worked with numerous partners to move that project forward and do a huge amount of dredging to make sure that a lot of the water that comes from those developments is held in our lake and then pulsed out into the Blue River watershed. But this is a really neat spot on the future Coffee Creek Trail. And so this land is not publicly accessible, but for the time being, It's held just as conservation land, and we'll be working diligently to slowly move the Coffee Creek Trail down this valley near these headwaters, connected to the Blue River Streamway, and then that will eventually connect into Missouri and maybe into some Jackson County parkland. And we'd have a trail system along the Blue River corridor from Kansas to Missouri in the future. JCPRD really takes riparian corridors seriously, and a lot of people recreate in the Kill Creek Trail system, and they recreate along the Mill Creek Trail system, and then along the Cedar Creek corridor in our Cedar Niles Park. And a lot of folks think about it as recreation, but through forethought, a lot of these really important river and creek corridors in the county have been protected by JCPRD. And so there's room and space for floodwaters to expand out on the landscape. And where we are now, as we're overlooking this beautiful Blue River, the Coffee Creek corridor, most of it is conserved by JCPRD, and it's not built out as a trail system yet, but a lot of the areas around it have been conserved. And so all this land is sitting, and it's waiting to be opened as a recreational space. And they're narrow corridors, but they're really important corridors for ecosystem services, for floodwaters to expand, and for us to plant prairie habitat to absorb a lot of that water. And so as we continue building these bike trail systems, you can't just think about it as recreation. You think about these large water systems that we're putting stream buffers, riparian buffers, and creating protection around these different zones that go north and south and east and west around the county. And so it is recreation, but it really is creating a lot of important stormwater solutions for the citizens of Johnson County, and holding back some of that floodwater that heads or to Jackson County as well. Welcome to the suburbs. Cue the leaf blower.
No joke.
All right, so we left the Blue River, and we left where Coffee and Wolf come together. And we're up in a prairie that I planted about 12 years ago. This was a cornfield. It was an agricultural field that we had in a lease where farmers were coming in and planting corn and soybeans every year, and it was directly adjacent to the river corridor. And so we decided that it would be great to lock it into tallgrass prairie. And so this prairie was planted, and we use a haying rotation on this site. So we have to be careful with haying, in that if we cyclically hay the exact same time of year, year after year after year, you lose the ecosystem services of a lot of the plants in the second half of the year. And so you'll lose bees that you would usually see mid to late summer eventually if you keep that rotation going, because the nectar sources are never there. And so we'll rest this some years, and we're going to try to put fire on it, but we can't hay it 4 or 5 years in a row, or the seed doesn't ever drop from a lot of the wildflowers. This is a site that is we call it a maintenance prairie. This isn't a high quality, high diversity site, but we still need to care for it and make sure we're not being too aggressive with any disturbance. And we know that eventually a paved trail is going to come through here that'll probably cause 40 feet of disturbance through the site, and so we didn't want to go high diversity now. And so once we know a trail is eventually through here, and we're connected over to the Blue River Wetlands, then we would probably do some diversity seeding and improve the amount of wildflowers here on this site. It's a beautiful location, but it's in a valley with homes all around it, so prescribed fire is something we've wanted to use in this landscape, and we've had a hard time finding the right opportunity, so it's been in a hay rotation. And disturbance on prairies is really important. So we have a neighboring landowner that owns the other half of the agricultural field here. Ours has been forever locked down into prairie, and when you look to the east, you can see when disturbance stops, sycamores come in, cottonwoods come in. And so there's nothing necessarily wrong with letting a landscape go into riparian forest. But when you stop disturbance on prairies, we lose the ability to keep the woody growth under control. And so we have this absolutely gorgeous grassland full of grassland birds here with us, and full of wildflowers. They're a little behind areas that have been burned this year due to the haying rotation. But a lot of coneflower and compass plants emerging. And so we're going to keep this in a hay rotation with occasional fire and resting. But you can see how 3 to 4 years of lack of management allows for a riparian kind of wet prairie to very quickly get woody fast. And so if a management goal is to let it become a forest, that's great. But we want to keep this as an open kind of wet bottomland prairie. and our neighbors are letting this go, and we're going to have some really cool sycamore habitat adjacent to us, but it's very interesting to see how quickly a lack of disturbance allows a landscape to change. All right, so we are on the Blue River Streamway Trail, which is probably one of the most unknown JCPRD parks. And so this is a loop trail system with 3 wetland cells in the center of it, directly on the Blue River. So we're near 167th and Knoll, and this is a phenomenal site. So off to our south, we have a gorgeous riparian Blue River woodland, and the Blue River is right there. Then we have this wetland structure, and then we have prairie around it, and then we have these 2 neighborhoods where, when they were designed, they have native habitat that it has fingers that go up with paved trails from our trail system all the way up into the neighborhood. And so there are fingers of tall grass and of forest that it kind of encircle this neighborhood. And so you have this really neat gradient where you have a natural space that actually integrates into a neighborhood. And that's really the way you would like to see neighborhoods built, is to see nature coexisting with home development. And so it's a really neat mixture of wild spaces and homes that is seamlessly connected. There isn't a defined parking lot for the Blue River Streamway. So if you look at Google Earth near 167th and Knoll, you're going to look for public parking. Near homes, you're going to try to find just a spot that doesn't interfere with the neighborhood. Park on the edge of a road, anywhere where there's no parking signs, and then you can hop on the trail from multiple little locations. There's a Blue Valley Middle School and Elementary School with a small nature center nearby, and if school's not in session, it's easy to park at the school and walk on the paved trail where the school is just on the east side of the park. The Blue River at one time was used for recreation, and there's lots of cool photos of people on boats paddling on the Blue River through Kansas City. And due to the flashy nature of urban flooding and encroachment of invasive species, people have really been disconnected from the Blue River. And so there's a lot of opportunities where partners like Heartland Conservation get folks out to kayak on the Blue again and get people engaging and experiencing the Blue. And so this wetland complex and the Blue River here at the Blue River Streamway is another great opportunity to connect with the Blue River. So in the woods, you can actually get down to the edge of the Blue here, and it's absolutely stunning. We're just 2 miles away from where we were at the Headwaters, and it's a gorgeous, I'd call it a creek here, versus the river that you're going to see as you get closer to Kansas City. And this wetland that we're looking at right now absorbs a massive amount of stormwater. We're going to walk a couple of bridges in a minute, and both of them were moved during a flood event a few years ago. So a lot of the energy from the upper Blue can be absorbed in this wetland system. And this is a complex that a private developer created as a wetland mitigation bank. People would destroy wetland habitat, and he created this to sell credits. But eventually, once the wetland mitigation bank was closed out, it became a public park. And so now JCPRD manages the site and has a trail easement. We have paved trails around the entire cell. We own 2 of the wetlands, and a private party still owns the 3rd wetland to the west. We're seeing water lilies. We're going to see American lotus. Unfortunately, we will see some invasive species here and there. But overall, you're going to see warm season grasses and prairie up on the edges, and we're going to see a lot of willow on the banks, and lily and lotus out in the open water. We don't have a control structure that allows us to draw this down, unfortunately. So we're working with Ducks Unlimited and maybe scheming some plans and where maybe we can control the water level in this and allow us to maybe optimize it for shorebirds in April and May. And so we have some plans that, if we could alter this water level, it could be more important for wildlife. Just like or you could say Eastern red cedar is also native, and sometimes it expands beyond, maybe where it originally would have encroached. And so it's really just management to make sure that one species never takes over an entire system, and make sure that we're kind of creating disturbance. And flooding creates disturbance as well. So a flood event could also knock the lotus and lily back, things like that. So it's a system that would be nice to manipulate and make sure none of the players ever kind of overwhelm the system. We have the ability, if the American lotus and the water lilies get out of control, we can draw down the water level and dry it out. And they need that water to survive, and so it gives us a chance to really knock back some of those aggressive aquatic species, and allows us to have some shorebird habitat and have mud flats for a lot of different migrating birds to use. We do have prothonotary warblers nesting here, and so along the Blue River, some of our master naturalist friends have seen the prothonotaries nesting in this area, so we do have some kind of threatened birds that are using this corridor. So here at Blue River Streamway, we see a lot of egrets and a lot of migrating waterfowl. The water's fairly deep, as we mentioned, so you don't see a ton of shorebirds. But this spring I hiked and got to see most of the warblers you would expect to migrate through. They were all just singing in the corridor of the Blue River Forest directly behind us. And so it's a neat place to go bird watching, because you've got these big open wetland marshes and you've got this deep forest directly behind it. And so all the herons you'd ever want to see, and a lot of the migrating birds, and all the red-winged blackbirds you'd ever want to see. So it's a neat site because it has so much diversity of habitat between the deep forest and the open marshes. When you work in wetlands, a lot of times you get to work with beavers, and beavers are awesome architects that, you know, work in our natural systems. But a lot of times when you have park infrastructures like roads, trails, and bridges, you end up projects like this where the beavers denned underneath the bridge abutment, and it collapsed the bridge. And so we had to come back in and re-pour a footing and rebuild access through this bridge. And the overflow for this wetland system is also something the beavers like to pack up and stop the flow, so they have more habitat. And so we spent a lot of time digging out the overflow on this unit, and we're working for a solution where we'd like to install a beaver deceiver, a system that allows water to flow through, and the beavers can't pack it, or they don't attempt to pack it. And so we're looking for some solutions so we don't have to spend as much time protecting the infrastructure from the beavers. Beavers are native to Kansas, and they were almost extirpated, and they were gone from a lot of parts of the country, and they have a strong presence on the Blue River. We see otters, we'll see mink, so there's a lot of different mammals that are moving through the corridor.
American beavers are not only adorable semi-aquatic engineers, they shape and support the world around us. Keystone species, both flora and fauna, are the most valuable players in our ecosystem. They play a vital role supporting the majority of other living creatures, including people. Beavers are quintessential keystone species, ensuring the land stays verdant and full of life. When removed from an environment, we lose a lot more than just beavers. Beaver lodges create habitat for both rare and generalist insects, amphibians, fish, mammals, reptiles, and birds. Their manipulation of streamways lock in moisture into areas that would end up desiccated otherwise. So next time you see a beaver or hear the loud slap of their tail on the water, go ahead and thank them for their service to our land.
All right, so another part of wetland management is cattails. If you have a really shallow system, cattails can be really aggressive and they can overwhelm an entire wetland system. So with the Blue River Streamway, we have enough deep water in the center of this that we just have the cattails isolated to a few of the emergent edges. And we try to keep the cattails in zones, and we want them there for bird habitat and for functioning as they do, but we try to make sure that they don't overtake the entire system. So occasionally we'll use herbicide or mechanical cutting to try to keep the cattails contained to zones, because they will completely overtake an ecosystem. They are native, but there are exotic cattails as well, and they hybridize. So we try to, just like when we talked about some of our other systems, is you try to not let individual species overtake an entire system, and just make sure that keep it in bounds or let it have a good season and push it back, things like that. So when we work in wetlands, it's a great question, is we have to be very specific with the herbicides we use. And so when we're dealing with purple loosestrife or we're dealing with cattails, we're using a very specific herbicide that is rated to be near or in water. And so if we have another option with purple loosestrife, there's actually a beetle there's actually a biocontrol that you could use to control purple loosestrife, and that's something we've looked into. And so there's some other options with some of the wetland invasives, but we try to be really exact, and you cannot use your upland terrestrial herbicides, so you really have to read the full label and make sure you're using something specific to use near aquatic systems.
And with those aquatic herbicides, are they safe for wildlife?
Yeah, so got to read the label. Every herbicide's different, and so yeah, we're looking for the herbicides that have the least effect on wildlife. And but yeah, it's always reading the full label to make sure it's not dangerous in the system you're using it in.
My name is Brady Stockwell. I am an intern for the Johnson County Parks and Recreation Natural Resource Division, and I'm just kind of hanging out this summer helping with a lot of the stuff that they're doing to help the parks. But so far I've done a lot of invasive species control. I've helped with some fisheries stuff, electrofishing, and now we're getting out here. Here we've got some arrowroot. So this is a wetland species that we find throughout Kansas, and it's going to be in a lot of like shallow or like slow moving areas on the banks of a lot of water features, and it's actually also called duck potato, and it is actually a food source which the Native American tribes used to eat the tubers. So that's, yeah, pretty cool. Flower on these guys are going to be white. They're going to have 3 petals on the end, and they're going to have a little yellow center.
That's a red-eyed vireo. Who am I? Who are you? So while we were out here exploring the Blue River corridor on the parkland, we came across a little rogue trail system. And so we found an area with some mountain bike jumps, and we found an area where somebody made a rope swing. And you would think that there's not a big deal, but then folks cut a tree down to make more space for the rope swing. And it looks like there's been some impacts and some new trail systems forming, and they don't have good erosion control. And so our trail manager will probably have to come take a look at this system and see if this rogue trail system needs to be closed down. It may look like it was intended to be a mountain bike trail system as part of our system, but it is not. And so we're just finding a kind of a new area, and then we may have to take a peek and see if this is something we need to shut down and close or improve access. And so it's something for a trail professional to examine and see. Sometimes folks will build trails from their own private property into our parks, and it can confuse folks, and they can get onto a trail that is not a sustainably built trail, and it may take them in an area with no wayfinding, no maps, and so we don't want folks to get lost or hurt in our trail systems.
What are some good resources if folks want to find trails that they can do mountain biking?
Yeah, so Urban Trail Co. is our local nonprofit that works on both sides of the state lines, and they have lots of resources, and all of our Johnson County Park trail systems are on their website. Our website has information about our trail systems, but Urban Trail Co. or UTC, you can learn about single track and when they're open and closed due to wet weather across the metro. In the Midwest, we have clay soils, and a lot of people move here from Arkansas or Colorado, and they're like, why are the trails closed? Because we have these wet clay soils. We've got some grumpy squirrels. And our soils hold a lot of moisture, and our feet impact them, and our mountain bike tires rut them up, and then it holds water, and then they never dry out. And the more people use them and the more it ruts, the deeper it gets, and then they stay closed longer. And so a lot of our JCPRD systems have a gate, and as soon as they're dry, we open them to allow use because we get so many thousands and thousands of visitors on our trails. We have a rain outline system and Urban Trail Co.'s website. So we have an app where managers will update it as open or closed, and you can get a text directly to your phone. So rain outline, and you find Urban Trail Co. or Johnson County Parks, and you're able to get immediate access of when the trails are opening and closing.
From the prairies of southern Johnson County comes the Blue River, the heartbeat of the greater Kansas City area. And regardless of which side of state line you reside, the health of the Big Blue affects us all. There are many ways to enjoy its presence, from walking trail systems to bird watching to paddling with local organizations. I hope today's Deep Roots Native Plant webinar has inspired you to get outdoors this summer and recreate along or in the Blue River Watershed. Tune in August 7th for part 2 as we explore Camp Branch Glade along the Blue River corridor with Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. Stick around, our live Q&A is coming up next. Wonderful. Hello, Matt.
Good afternoon.
All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and start our AMA, Ask Me Anything, the Matt Garrett edition with Johnson County Parks and Recreation District. So, first, when we get started here, we have just a couple quick questions about that trail along the wetland. Let me pull this up real quick. Okay, so Joyce is asking, are dogs allowed on the walking trails there?
Yeah, so leashed dogs are allowed on all JC Purity trails except for Ernie Miller Nature Center. So, like our video last month, Ernie Miller is the only place that we don't allow pet access.
Okay, good to know. Alexander from Wisconsin is asking about yellow flag iris. Is that an issue on stream banks around there? It's problematic for them further north in the Wisconsin area.
Yeah, we haven't seen it as a problematic invasive. It seems to be pretty limited here. The site we were at was planted with our native blue iris, and generally haven't seen the yellow. But we also don't have a lot of wetlands here. Wisconsin and Minnesota, they see a lot of wetlands and a lot of wetland management. And in the Kansas City area, there's very few publicly accessible wetlands to visit, and we have so few of them to manage. So it's one of the smallest land cover types we have. Luckily, it's not an invasive we're currently dealing with.
Good to know. Prior to colonization, I've learned that because of beavers, we used to have lots of wetlands here in North America, especially here in the Midwest. So, folks, if you actually want to learn more about beavers, highly recommend this book by Ben Goldfarb, Eager. It is The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter. So, speaking of infrastructure in general, um, let's see. What are zoning or land management practices that can support watershed health in Kansas municipalities?
Yeah, so anytime you can keep stormwater on your property and slow it down, the city of Lenexa is a good example. They do a lot of best management practices on their park sites, and they will capture runoff from parking lots, and they will grab and filter pollutants and make sure that, and then they even actually use lakes. So Lake Lenexa is actually a giant BMP that grabs water from Western Lenexa. And so, at a municipality level, there are opportunities to use recreation sites as stormwater control, which kind of keeps that energy in the system. We have a giant project going on right now on Mill Creek, where we're working with the county and building a huge buried stormwater detention structure, and we're going to cover it with prairie. And whenever there's a storm event, it's going to go into this huge underwater storage facility, and then the water is going to then move into Mill Creek. And so there's a lot of action in Johnson County to kind of control the amount of energy going into our creek and river systems.
I appreciate hearing that. Johnson County has been really great about supporting our natural systems, especially when it comes to our watershed. And so this kind of lends itself to Bill's question. What is the status of the Coleman property at the junction of Camp Branch and Blue Rivers? Could it help connect the riparian trails?
Yeah, that's an exciting future option, where there has been a master plan done where that super fun site has been cleaned up, and a master plan between, I believe, Johnson County Park District and the City of Overland Park have kind of envisioned what that former um, die-cast plant would look like, because it is directly across the river from the Blue River Streamway. And so it is the next eventual step. It's not in JCPRD hands at the moment. There's some tax issues and ownership issues to be worked through, but I would expect sometime in the future that that remediated former Superfund site will probably become a public park. Um, but it's always scary to add a Superfund site to your park system. And so that I think that there's a lot of future potential and energy for that site to become parkland. I think there's some probably political and law hurdles before it becomes public land.
Well, I just came up with a great tagline for Johnson County's efforts there. JC Purity puts the fun in super fun.
I hope not.
Matt, can you expand on your answer about how municipalities, maybe tiny cities, what can they do, or what can residents do to help support the health of a watershed?
Yeah, probably the easiest thing would be native plants. So, what this show is all about. And so cost sharing native plants here in Johnson County, and a lot of the cities partake in the county's stormwater rain direct or what contain the rain program. And so a lot of the cities you can plant a rain garden and put in rain barrels and native plants, and your city and through the county will actually reimburse you for a large amount of those costs. So anything you can do to put native landscape in your yard and rain gardens and things like that to have residents contain the rain on their own property, and slow that runoff is probably one of the best things you can really do, is those deep rooted native plants that really capture that water versus turf grass that just running off and heading back into the system.
So, on the topic of developments, how does habitat fragmentation affect both aquatic and terrestrial species along the river corridor?
Yeah, it's huge. Habitat loss is huge in all of our terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems right now. So the rate of expansion of development in Johnson County is a huge factor. And so we're really lucky to have some of these regional parks where we are making these huge connections and trying to have ownership. A lot of these streamway corridors are getting 1,000, 2,000 acre park sites. Kill Creek Park's going to gain 2,000 acres from the ammo plant here shortly. So as an agency, we're trying to get large pieces of significant habitat to protect, and can't control development in a lot of areas, but it's a serious threat. That neighborhood we visited, the wilderness, it's a neat idea. If more developers were integrating fingers of habitat and public land through their developed spaces, that would help a lot. If there were habitat corridors in developments. So that would be a neat idea to see more often in Kansas City versus houses just being built as tightly as possible.
Yeah, agreed. Especially with all this summer rain we've been having. I've seen tons of videos on the internet of these suburbs that are mostly turf with just rivers of water heading into culverts and things like that. And not only is it washing out roads, but all the chemicals used in lawns like herbicides and pesticides and emergents and fertilizers, that all is getting carried by this water into our watersheds. And it's not only impacting taxpayers, but our wildlife as well. So I would also love to see more developers taking a more wild approach like Wilderness Valley has.
Yeah.
Alexander has a question that's inspired by Donna's, which was in the comment in the chat. Um, and I know you work on the Kansas side, Matt, but do you know of similar projects or any collaborations with communities further downstream of Missouri who are protecting the Blue River watershed?
If are we talking about in the Kansas City area?
I think, yeah, Kansas City and just,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think,
Missouri.
yeah, our friends over at the Heartland Conservation Alliance are working really hard on the Blue River, and they have opportunities to go bird watching on the Blue and kayaking and hiking on the Blue. And Jackson County Parks has a huge stream corridor. I don't think a lot of people realize we've amassed a lot of public land near the Overland Park Arboretum all the way to the Missouri border, and we're slowly activating it. Jackson County and Kansas City, Missouri own a huge amount of public land from Jerry Smith Park down the whole Blue River Park corridor, Minor Park. So it's one of the largest protected riparian areas you're going to see in a regional system. And between all of these different public partners from Martin City all the way through town, like there's a lot of buffers and protection around the Blue, that some other communities may not see. But yeah, I think HCA and the Nature Conservancy of Kansas have both pushed real hard. And Missouri Conservation Department has put a lot of focus on that Blue River corridor. So yeah, I think there's a lot of energy in our community to protect the area.
Yeah, I know I'm a dreamer, but I would love to see even more recreation on the Blue River, just like we saw with those vintage postcards from the public library. That I think
Yeah,
just what a missed opportunity. I would love to see that make a comeback.
Yeah, we're going to make a second video where we're going to visit some of our other properties. And there's one where we can look across to Jackson County Parkland right across the river. So there's just so much potential in Kansas City to cross the state border and have some recreation options.
Absolutely. Okay, this is a question from Anonymous. It sounds like Johnson County Parks and Recreation District has a larger plan for the southern part of the county. Are there any synergies being shared with Douglas County and attempting to link in Baker Wetlands somehow?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So Johns County Park District is doing an overall master plan for our natural resource management right now, updating our 2019 plan. And Douglas County is one of our partners. And Douglas County is in the room for a lot of these conversations. And we have some interesting connections when we're tripling the size of Kill Creek Park to have access for Douglas County residents from the west side. And I know Ducks Unlimited is working now at Baker Wetlands, and they've become a close partner recently of JCPRD as well. And so I think you're going to see a lot of synergy maybe between the management of Baker and our new 3,000 acre Kill Creek Park site that's coming. And I think you're going to see a lot more collaboration between nonprofit partners and JCPRD. So yeah, I think over the next couple of years, you're going to see a lot more synergy between management of these zones. And we've even talked about strike teams or groups of natural resource staff from different agencies maybe working together. There's some potential there. Could, a team from Ducks Unlimited and JCPRD, and, somebody from HCA and KC Wildlands, could we all work to take care of a place together? And so I think in Missouri has some really good examples of strike teams working. And so that's something here in the KC area, maybe, we need to take advantage of and see how different groups could work together to take care of some of these spots.
Absolutely. Teamwork makes the dream work. Okay, I've got a few more questions for you. So let's pivot to native plants. Carolyn is asking, do you know how many species of plants you planted on the restored prairie area that we saw at the beginning of today's episode? And follow-up question, where did you find your seed source?
Yeah, so I want to say that probably had 35 forbs and 6 grasses. And it was what we call, like I mentioned in the video, a maintenance prairie. So it's not something that's on track right now to be a real high diversity site. So that would have been a more low quality mix, but having season nectar sources all season, blooms all season long, just not as many of them. And so something like that is going to cost me like $150 to $200 an acre, while we can do a high diversity blend that could be as high as $1,000 an acre to plant. And that's, when you're over 100 different species of wildflowers. Um, we buy from a lot of different vendors, and because native seed, it's really hard to get as much locally as possible. So Hamilton Seed Outpost out of the Ozarks, Star Seed out of Kansas, we use a lot. Pure Air native seed out of Missouri. So we have multiple vendors, and I have a bid where I have a JC Purity wildflower mix, and then I have different providers that can get that to me. We buy truckloads of native seed, so we can buy over $100,000 in wildflower seed a year, and so we get a lot out on the ground every season, but it's incredibly expensive.
That's amazing. So earlier you discussed how disturbance is important for natural communities. Can you explain why?
Yeah. So our native habitats here in Kansas City were built with disturbance. So Johnson County was 86% prairie at one point. So our county was almost 90% prairie. And we only have 0.002% of that left, but fire was an important part of our landscape and grazers, and disturbance was always removing biomass. And that 12-foot big blue stem was being eaten, it was being burned and opening up bare ground for sun to hit and for plants to grow really strongly. And we've lost a lot of that. And so we have to and people have been for thousands of years managing the landscape. Indigenous people have been burning for thousands and thousands of years. So we really have to keep most of our landscapes on some sort of disturbance regimen to keep the woody growth out. The CO2 and with climate change, the woody growth is happening a lot faster. And so a lot of the research on the Kanza prairie, dogwoods and sumacs and trees are just rapidly growing faster than they ever have. And so grazing and haying and burning with a really strict regimen is really important for us to keep these traditional, you know, Kansas landscapes open like they were in pre-settlement conditions. And sometimes things get away from us, and in the future we're going to have to decide, maybe what are shrublands and what are open prairies, and keep our management where we can do it. But yeah, disturbance is just kind of at the heart of our natural habitats here in Kansas City.
Fair enough. Okay, I've got two more questions for you, and then we'll conclude today's episode. Helen is asking, what is the trail website you mentioned to see if areas are open?
Sure. That's Urban Trail Co. And so that's urbantrailco.com. And so they used to be called Earth Riders, and they became a nonprofit that was more focused on trails for hiking and biking and everything for the whole community, but it's trailco.com.
And I'll also include links to those resources following today's show. You'll get an email from me directly with that information.
Yeah, that group has over 200 miles of single track, that most of it is all built and maintained by volunteers. So they're really, the long-term management of it's really important when volunteers put so much time into those single track trails.
Wow. Okay, final question from my buddy JL Johnson. JL is in the process of moving to a property that butts up against a creek that eventually feeds to the Little Blue. He loves the idea of slowing catching runoff. Do you have thoughts on resources to identify native plants best adapted to ephemeral runoff ponds?
No, that's an interesting question. Yeah, the ephemeral pools are neat, like kind of microhabitats. And I'm sure that Missouri Prairie Foundation and their Grow Native website might have point you in the right direction of those species that like to be wet and then immediately dry for a long time. And so that's not a world I work in a lot. I think a lot of your prairie plants can handle having their feet wet for a little while and then being dry the rest of the summer. So you're probably looking for something little less rain garden, and something kind of between there and a prairie, um, is what I'm going with, I'd assume. But you'd have a better answer than I would.
Well, I was thinking the same thing, kind of like jail. It kind of reminds me of a rain garden. Rain gardens, initially I thought, oh, it's a wet garden. That's not necessarily true. Rain gardens fluctuate. They get real dry and droughty, and then they get wet feet when we get big storm events. So like Alexander mentioned in the chat, button bush, that would be a great one. I can also handle average soil. Your marsh milkweeds, blue mist flower is a great one too, though she is a prolific friend. There's a lot of really great options. Grow Native does have some good native plant pairings. So you might look there for like rain garden options. But as Matt said, prairie species will do great too. My recommendation would be don't forget your rushes and sedges, and don't just stick with herbaceous forbs like flowers. Get some other biodiversity in there, maybe some woody species as well. And I can't wait to hear about your move, JL. That'll be great. Okay. I think that's all we have time for today. Matt, I want to thank you again for joining us. You are a regional treasure. Appreciate you so much and all the efforts that you and Johnson County Parks and Recreation District provides for our community. So, folks, if you want to learn more on our part 2 of the Blue River Watershed, be sure to join us in August for that episode when we explore Camp Branch Glade. Did I say that right? Camp
Yes.
Camp Branch Glade, 3 words. Got it in the right order. It'll be a great episode. And our next episode on July 17th will be discovering Ozark natural communities with me and Missouri Department of Conservation. Thank you all so much. Have a safe and happy holiday weekend, and we'll see you again soon.